Good morning. Today's class is about cystic diseases of kidney. Before we begin, let us revise about the structure of the kidney. Kidney is divided into two parts, cortex and medulla. Cortex forms the outer rim of the kidney and it is made up of glomeruli and about 85% of the tubules of nephron. So the remaining 15% of the nephrons, which consists of collecting tubules and collecting ducts and loops of Henle, they loop into the medulla, which are called as juxtamedullary nephrons. So these juxtamedullary nephrons, they form striations called as medullary rays. So these are located in the cortex itself, but they are destined for medulla. And then the renal cortical tissue, which is present in between the pyramids of the medulla, they're called as renal column of Burton, which again contain interlobar arteries. And the medulla of the kidney is made up of renal pyramids, which consists of loop of Henle and collecting ducts. And the tip of the renal pyramid is called as papillae, which is nothing but an opening of each renal pyramid for the passage of urine, which is collected from the collecting ducts, and it goes down into the minor calyces. So here you can see the renal cortex is mainly made up of the glomeruli, then proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule, and part of the collecting tubules. So it is about 85% of the nephron is situated in the cortex. So the rest of it, that is the loop of Henle and then the collecting ducts, they are mainly found in the medullary portion of the kidney, that is the pyramid. So you can see at the tip of the pyramid you have the papillae, which opens into the minor calyces. So now coming to the renal pelvis. So the renal pelvis again, it consists of it is a funnel shaped collection area for the urine, drainage of the urine, which drains into the ureter. So it has minor calyces, which are about 8 to 20 in number in the normal kidney. They collect urine from the renal papillae and drain into the major calyces, which again drain into the renal pelvis. So this is how a normal kidney looks like. The first picture shows the external surface of the the kidney, and then the cut section shows the outer cortex, and then you can see the medulla in the cortical medullary region. Then you have the medullary rays, then the renal pelvis, minor calyces and major calyces. So this is how the cut section of the normal kidney looks like. Next, coming to the blood supply of the kidney. So it is mainly by the renal artery, which arises from the aorta. So this in turn branches into segmental branches and then into the interlobar arteries, which give off the arcuate arteries. So these arcuate arteries will arch between the cortex and medulla. They in turn give rise to the interlobular artery, which then gives rise to afferent arteriole. So this afferent arteriole is the one which supplies each single glomerulus. So from the glomerulus, the efferent arteriole will emerge. So up to this stage, the arteries and arterioles of the kidney, they are the end arteries. That means they have no anastomosis, and if there is a occlusion of any of these branches, it can result in infarction of the renal parenchyma, which is supplied by it. Then these efferent arteriole in turn will again join the peritubular capillaries and the vasa recta. So in turn, all these capillaries will drain into the interlobular vein. So this in turn into the arcuate vein, then into the interlobular vein. Finally, it drains into the renal vein, so which in turn drains into inferior vena cava. So this is how the blood supply of the kidney is. And the lymphatic, so the kidney as such though it forms only the 0.5% of the total body weight, it receives mainly 25% of the cardiac output. So it is richly supplied with blood. So the lymphatic drainage, it follows the same pathway like the vessels, and ultimately it drains into the aortic lymph node. Now let us look at the structure of the glomerulus. So each glomerulus consists of an anastomosing network of capillaries which is lined by fenestrated endothelium. And these network of capillaries, they are covered by two layers of the epithelial cells, that is parietal epithelial cell and visceral epithelium. So visceral epithelium, which covers the capillaries of glomeruli, is made up of podocytes. These two epithelial layers are separated by what we call as Bowman space or Bowman urinary space. So into this space the glomerular filtrate will pass. So then we also have what is called as a juxtaglomerular apparatus, which is made up of juxtaglomerular cells, which are nothing but the modified smooth vessels, smooth muscle cells in the afferent arterioles. Then you have macula densa, which are nothing but some specialized tubular cells which are narrow and tall in shape, and these are concerned with production of renin. So each glomerulus again has the urinary pole, wherein it continues as the proximal convoluted tubule, and the vascular pole where the afferent arteriole enters the glomeruli and the efferent arteriole will leave the glomerulus. So the structure of this so in between the capillary network we have mesangium, which is made up of mesangial cells and the matrix. So this is the structure of the glomerulus. So this will help you to understand the pathophysiology of the glomerular diseases, which will be covered in the next few chapters. So the glomerular capillary wall as such is the filtering membrane. So what are the layers in this filtering membrane? It is made up of three layers. That is, first layer will be the thin layer of the fenestrated endothelial cells of the capillaries. Next comes the glomerular basement membrane. This again, when we look at the electron microscope, it has a thick electron dense central layer which is called as lamina densa, and it has thinner electron lucent peripheral layers, two peripheral layers. So structurally, glomerular basement membrane consists of collagen, laminin, and some proteoglycans. And the third layer is the visceral epithelial cells, that is the podocytes, which have interdigitating processes which are attached to the basement membrane. So these foot processes are separated by 20 to 30 nanometer wide filtration slits. So these are again bridged by a thin diaphragm. So the fourth component will be the mesangial cells, which lie in between the capillaries and they're embedded in the mesangial matrix. So this is how the electron microscopy of the glomerulus looks like. Now coming on to the normal function of the kidney. As you all know, it helps in excretion of the waste products of metabolism, and the second important function is it regulates the water and salt concentration and in turn maintains the acid base balance. Apart from this, it also serves an endocrine organ. It secretes hormones like erythropoietin, then renin and prostaglandin. So now let us discuss about the various clinical manifestations of renal diseases. So as such, the renal disease manifestations are grouped into well-defined syndromes. So first one is the azotemia. So when we use the word azotemia, it is a condition characterized by elevation of plasma concentration of blood urea nitrogen and creatinine. So this can be due to pre-renal, renal or the post-renal causes. And then we have the term uremia. So it means azotemia along with clinical signs and symptoms and biochemical abnormalities. So next group of renal syndrome is the acute nephritic syndrome. So this is nothing but a glomerular syndrome characterized by acute onset of grossly visible hematuria, mild to moderate proteinuria and hypertension. So next coming to the nephrotic syndrome, it is characterized by heavy proteinuria, that is nothing but the excretion of more than 3.5 grams of proteins per day, followed by hypoalbuminemia, severe edema, hyperlipidemia and lipiduria. See, the other three manifestations are: one is acute renal failure, which is characterized by oliguria or anuria with recent onset of azotemia, and this is nothing but a rapid and reversible deterioration of renal function. Whereas chronic renal failure is associated with prolonged symptoms and signs of uremia, which is an end result of most of the chronic renal parenchymal diseases and tubular defects. So they present as polyuria, nocturia and electrolyte disorders. Next, coming to urinary tract infections. This is again characterized by bacteriuria and pyuria, which manifests as pyelonephritis or cystitis. So the renal disorders as a clinical manifestations are grouped under four categories like azotemia, uremia, acute nephritic syndrome, nephrotic syndrome, and in the end stages they can present as acute renal failure, chronic renal failure, and as an infective condition, that is urinary tract infection. So now coming to the cystic diseases of the kidney. So these diseases are important for certain reasons. One is they are common, and these cystic tumors can sometimes be confused with some malignant tumors. So it has to be morphologically differentiated from them, and some of the cystic lesions, they can cause some chronic diseases of the kidney. So these are the reasons why we need to know about the different cystic diseases of the kidney. So they differ in their inheritance, in the mode of inheritance, whether they are hereditary or acquired, and then they vary in their morphologic appearance, the clinical manifestations, and also the prognosis. So they can be either congenital or acquired, neoplastic or non-neoplastic, or it can occur at any age, even from the fetal stage to the old age, and they manifest with abdominal mass, infection, hemorrhage and malignant transformation. So now coming to the classification of cystic diseases of kidney, they are broadly classified into non-neoplastic cystic lesions and neoplastic cystic lesions. So under non-neoplastic we have the renal multicystic dysplasia. Then the second one is the polycystic kidney disease, which again has three subtypes, that is the adult polycystic kidney disease, infantile, and then we have the medullary cystic disease complex. And the third one is medullary cystic disease, which is again has two components. Then we have the simple renal cyst followed by acquired renal cyst, which can be associated with renal dialysis, hydatid cyst and tuberculosis. Then we have the pararenal cysts, which are seen adjacent to the kidney. So coming to the neoplastic cystic lesions, it can be a part of a cystic nephroma, then nephroblastoma, or it can be even a subtype of a Wilms tumor wherein it shows a multifocal cystic changes. So we broadly classify the cystic diseases into non-neoplastic and neoplastic cystic lesions. Now coming to each individual cystic diseases of kidney. The first one is the multicystic renal dysplasia, which presents as either unilateral or bilaterally enlarged cystic kidneys. So it is frequently discovered in newborn or in infants when they has a flank mass. So these disorders are mainly due to defective renal differentiation, and so because of this there is presence of undifferentiated mesenchyme in the kidney. So the dysplastic process as such can involve the entire renal mass or it can involve only a part of it. So grossly when you examine, the kidneys are enlarged, irregular, and they are multicystic, and these cysts vary in size from microscopic to several centimeters in diameter, which can resemble a bunch of grapes on cut section. Now coming to the microscopy in multicystic renal dysplasia, these cysts are lined by flattened epithelium. So apart from the cystic spaces, we can find islands of undifferentiated mesenchyme, cartilage, and immature collecting ducts. So as far as the glomeruli and tubules of the nephron are concerned, they are either scanty, primitive, or sometimes it can be completely absent. So here is a picture of multicystic renal dysplasia. You can see the cysts which are lined by the flattened epithelium. Then apart from that, there are foci of primitive mesenchyme and cartilage. So how exactly do these patients present? So this they can mimic a neoplasm, and if it is affecting a unilateral kidney, then it has excellent prognosis after surgical removal of the affected kidney, whereas in case of bilateral multicystic renal dysplasia, renal failure may ultimately occur. So if it occurs, then it results in death in infancy itself unless renal transplant is done. So apart from these, the cystic disease of the kidney, it can be associated with other congenital anomalies. So if it is unilateral, it has excellent prognosis, but if it is bilateral, then it can result in renal failure. So next, coming on to polycystic kidney disease, it is mainly of two types depending on the age of onset and the inheritance, adult type and the infantile type. So the adult polycystic kidney, again it is a hereditary disorder which is autosomal dominant, which is associated with mutation in the PKD gene. So in this condition, the cysts involve only the portions of the nephrons. So renal function as such will be retained, and these patients will be asymptomatic until about 3rd to 5th decade of life, when they can present with some symptoms. It is usually bilateral and diffuse. So the basic pathophysiology here is there is abnormality of the cilium, which so dysfunction of these cilium of the tubular epithelial cells, they result in alteration in the ion flux, and this in turn changes the cell proliferation and function, which culminates in the renal cyst formation. So the kidneys of adult polycystic kidney, they are always bilaterally enlarged, symmetrically enlarged. They're heavy, weighing up to about even 4 kgs. On external surface, it gives rise to lobulated appearance because of presence of the cysts. On cut section, it shows cysts which are distributed throughout the renal parenchyma. They vary in size from tiny cysts to about 4 to 5 centimeters in diameter. Here again, the renal pelvis and the calyces are present, but they can be distorted by the cysts. So this is the external surface of the kidney, which appears lobulated because of the presence of cyst. This is again another picture of the same. So here you can see the cut section of the adult polycystic kidney disease, wherein you can see multiple cystic spaces of varying sizes occupying the kidney. So apart from that, it can have some extrarenal manifestation like hepatic cyst and cyst in other regions, and sometimes even a intracranial aneurysm. So now coming to the microscopic appearance. So these cysts arise from the tubules throughout the nephron. They may show variable lining epithelium from cuboidal to columnar. Then apart from this, the functioning nephrons are seen in between the cysts. So how exactly do these patients present? So they are asymptomatic until the symptoms of chronic renal failure appear later in the life. They can present with hematuria, renal colic, or sometimes with signs and symptoms of urinary tract infection or hypertension. And they can present with progressive chronic renal failure. So adult polycystic kidney disease as such as autosomal dominant inheritance, they are bilaterally and symmetrical affection of the kidney. And now coming to the childhood polycystic kidney disease, which is a autosomal recessive condition. So here again it has various subtypes depending on the age of affection. So it can be perinatal, neonatal, infantile and juvenile. So here again it is due to the mutations of the PKHD1 gene. So this codes for a novel protein, that is the fibrocystin. So here you can see the cut section of the kidney. So here it is showing, so the kidneys as such are enlarged with smooth external appearance, and cut section shows many fusiform or cylindrical cysts which are radiating from the medullary region, and they can extend up to the cortex. So this gives rise to a sponge-like appearance of the entire kidney. And there is, in contrast to the adult polycystic kidney, there is no normal parenchyma in between the cysts. Coming to the microscopy, there is a cylindrical dilatation of all the collecting tubules. So it is the collecting tubules which are mainly affected in the childhood polycystic kidney disease. They have a uniform lining of cuboidal cells, and they can be associated with liver cysts, and which can in turn result in portal fibrosis. So this again shows the microscopic appearance and the gross appearance of childhood polycystic kidney. The clinical manifestations of these conditions, they depend on the age of the child. If it occurs in the infancy, it can present with renal failure in the early ages. So in older children which are associated with the hepatic cysts, they can give rise to congenital hepatic fibrosis, which in turn leads to portal hypertension and splenomegaly. So here is a contrasting feature between the adult type and the infantile type. So adult one has a autosomal dominant inheritance. The external surface is lobulated, and on the section surface you can see variable sized cyst. Whereas in case of infantile type, which is autosomal recessive, you have smooth outer surface, and on the cut section it shows tiny fusiform cysts. So here is a table which shows contrasting features between the adult polycystic kidney disease and infantile polycystic kidney disease. So the mode of inheritance is autosomal dominant, and it is recessive in case of infantile. And then mutations is in the PKD1 gene, and then in infantile type it is in the PHKD1. Whereas microscopically again, adult PKD consists of macrocysts, which have cysts derived from all parts of the nephron, that is including the glomeruli and tubules, whereas in autosomal recessive infantile they have a sponge-like kidney on cut section which shows cysts mainly from the dilated collecting ducts. So now next coming on to the medullary cystic diseases. So it has two entities. One is the medullary sponge kidney and another one is the medullary cystic disease complex, which is nothing but nephronophthisis. Coming to the medullary sponge kidney. So it shows cystic dilatation of the collecting ducts in the medullary papillae. So the location of the cyst here is in the medullary papillae. And in adults, sometimes it can be just an incidental finding because the renal function will be normal, but sometimes it can result in complications like calculi formation in the cyst. Then it can result in pain, hematuria, and signs and symptoms of infection. Now, medullary cystic disease or nephronophthisis, it is a progressive renal disorder. The onset is usually in the childhood, and it shows characteristically it shows cyst at the corticomedullary junction. And the cause for renal insufficiency here is due to the cortical tubulointerstitial damage. That's why it is also known as hereditary tubulointerstitial nephritis. So it is a cause for CRF in about 20 to 25% of CRF in children and adolescents. So this again is due to mutations in various 5 genes, and depending on that, so there are 3 variants: sporadic, familial, and non-familial. So familial juvenile one is the one which is the most common variety. It can be associated with other retinal dysplasias. So this again is one of the common genetic cause of end-stage renal disorder, especially in children and young adults. Coming to the gross appearance, kidneys here are small and they have contracted granular surfaces, and mainly they show cyst in the medullary region, that is at the corticomedullary junction. Microscopically, these cysts are lined by flattened or cuboidal epithelium. This can be surrounded by inflammatory cells and fibrous tissue. So finally, the cortex shows widespread atrophy and thickening of the basement membranes of the tubules along with interstitial fibrosis. So this is the cut section of the kidney. You can see those cystic spaces are present mainly in the corticomedullary region. So this medullary cystic disease should be considered in patients they usually have a positive family history, and also it is mainly suspected in children or adolescents who present with unexplained chronic renal failure. And when you do a renal biopsy, it usually shows chronic tubulointerstitial nephritis. Coming to the simple renal cysts, these are the conditions which are commonly seen with ultrasound imaging. So the incidence as such increases with age. In about 50% of all persons who are aged above 50 years, these simple renal cysts can be found. So they do not again affect the renal function. So the main importance lies in differentiating these from other kidney tumors. So they vary in diameter from 1 to 5 centimeters. They are usually translucent in appearance and they are filled with clear fluid. Grossly, they are usually solitary, but they can be multiple. They are commonly located in the cortical region, and the size varies from few millimeters even up to 10 centimeters in diameter. So the wall of the cyst as such is characteristically yellowish white. They can be translucent and they contain clear straw colored fluid. And in case it is complicated due to hemorrhage, then the fluid can be rust colored. So this is how the gross appearance of a simple renal cyst looks like. Coming to microscopy, the lining of the cyst again is a flattened epithelium, and the wall as such can contain fibrous tissue with deposits of hemosiderin, especially if there is hemorrhage, or it can have calcium salts. So the next entity is acquired renal cysts. So this can be seen in patients with end-stage renal disease who are on prolonged dialysis. So it can be dialysis associated, or in case of hydatid disease, it can be seen, and also in tuberculosis of kidney and cystic degeneration in any carcinoma of the kidney. So these are the conditions wherein we can get acquired renal cysts. So few words about dialysis associated cysts. They are mainly seen in patients of chronic renal failure who are undergoing dialysis. They can appear, the cysts are present throughout the cortex and medulla. They usually arise from the obstruction of the tubules by interstitial fibrosis. The main complication which is dreaded is the transformation into renal cell carcinoma. So the other acquired disease will be glomerulocystic disease. So it can again present with both glomerular and tubular cysts. It results in bilateral enlargement of the kidney with tiny cysts. These will be lined by the flattened to cuboidal epithelium. So the last one is the pararenal cyst. So these are the cysts which are present in the tissue surrounding the kidney. They are occurring adjacent to a kidney. So it can be either a pyelocalcial cyst or in the hilar region of the kidney, where it can be a hilar lymphangitic cyst, or it can be in the retroperitoneal region, which are nothing but the retroperitoneal cysts, or sometimes they can be a pseudocyst formation in the perinephric area, which occurs due to trauma. So now, just to summarize, so we have various cystic disorders of the kidney. So they are different in many ways. That is, firstly, because of the inheritance. So they can be either hereditary or acquired, and they can be different mode of inheritance, either autosomal dominant or autosomal recessive. So they can affect either one or both the kidneys. That is, they can be either unilateral or bilateral. And the next factor which differentiates them is, so where exactly is the location of the cyst, whether they are arising from glomeruli or from the other part of the tubules, and where exactly it is situated. And there can be variation in the morphology of the cyst, and then whether there is no presence of normal renal parenchyma or not, and what is the age of the occurrence, and how exactly is their clinical manifestations and prognosis. So depending on these factors, we differentiate them into various cystic disorders. So here is a table which summarizes the different cystic diseases of the kidney, which I explained till now. So first, coming to the polycystic kidney disease, it can be adult or the childhood. So adult one has large multicystic kidneys, so they can be associated with other cysts in the other organs. Whereas childhood polycystic disease is usually autosomal recessive, and they present with enlarged cystic kidneys at birth. Then coming to the medullary sponge kidney, it doesn't have any autosomal inheritance. They present with cysts in the medullary region, which can be diagnosed on excretory urography. Then coming to the juvenile familial nephranocytosis, they have autosomal recessive inheritance. They present with shrunken kidneys, and they have corticomedullary cysts. Uh, then coming to the adult onset medullary cystic disease, they have corticomedullary cysts, but they have autosomal dominant inheritance. So coming to the next three conditions, that is the multicystic renal dysplasia, acquired renal disease, and simple cysts. All these cystic diseases do not have any genetic inheritance. Multicystic renal dysplasia has irregular kidneys with cysts of variable sizes, whereas acquired one is seen mainly in the end-stage renal diseases undergoing dialysis. And then we have finally the simple renal cysts, which can present as single or multiple cysts in normal-sized kidneys. So this is pictures of various cystic disorders. First one is first one is the renal cystic dysplasia, where the cut section looks like a bunch of grapes. Then we have the adult polycystic kidney disease, wherein we have the cysts of varying sizes occupying the entire kidney surface. Then we have the autosomal recessive infantile polycystic kidneys, where we have the cysts occupying the medullary region. Then the medullary sponge kidney, wherein we have the cystic spaces occupying the medullary region. Then we have the nephranocytes again, where it is situated at the corticomedullary junction. And then we have the simple renal cysts, where they can be either a solitary cysts which are filled with the clear fluid.